Welcome to Whatsoever More or Less. My name is Jason, and I'm going to go ahead and quickly share my best interpretation of how we are diminishing or working to diminish compound republicanism, which is what James Madison used to describe, that's the term he used to describe the kind of constitution we have, which this constitution was endorsed of course by lots of prophets, saying the Savior himself has endorsed it. And President Oaks, if you look at his 5 principles, without a doubt what they're describing is the big picture of compound republicanism. His 5 principles in his talk, Defending Our Divinely Inspired Constitution, which is the source of government power is the people. Then the powers are divided between the states and the federal government, which the federal government guarantees that every state shall have a Republican form of government. So that's compound republicanism really right there. Then the Republican form of government at the federal level, in other words, legislative, executive, and judicial powers are broken up. And then the Bill of Rights, the guarantees, as we would call them, right? There's other guarantees in the Constitution besides just those. And then the aspect that the Constitution itself is a written Constitution, and the oath is to the Constitution itself, not to any person or anything else like that. Or in other words, the responsibility of every person within the government to know the Constitution then and be able to defend it. Okay, so now these are some of the things that I have noticed. I'm not going to say this is a complete list. Okay, I'm just going to point to what I've thought of. So the Supreme Court historically began to refer to the 10th Amendment as a truism. Okay, the 10th Amendment says the power is not delegated by this Constitution to the government, to the United States government, or prohibited to the states, are reserved to the states or to the people, respectively. And this is me paraphrasing, of course, as I'm driving down the road. The preamble to the Bill of Rights, which each amendment was ratified through its own process, the Article 5 process. So the preamble is just the introduction to it, but it says in order to prevent misconstruction of this Constitution, or in other words, it's a rule of construction. The amendments themselves are what we call rules of construction, ways to interpret the Constitution. The Constitution, therefore, telling us how to interpret it. If the power is not delegated to the federal government nor prohibited to the states, it is reserved to the states or the people. So basically, it brought back terminology from the Articles of Confederation. It does not have to say explicitly. Explicitly does not matter. Yes, there is Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, which is the necessary and proper clause, but the full wording of the necessary and proper clause is necessary and proper to the foregoing powers, and those powers contained in this Constitution. Okay, so moving on here. The 17th Amendment. The 17th Amendment, so first off again, is the supposed idea that the 10th Amendment is a truism. It is not a truism, it is a rule of construction. Now the 17th Amendment, what that did is it diminished the representation of the states at the federal level. You might say, wait a second, what do you mean? There's still 2 senators. Yes, but are those 2 senators now accountable to the state legislatures at all times? The state legislators who are watching them like hawks, because that's what they do, making sure that those senators are serving the interests of the state at the federal level. By creating a popularly elected senator, you're creating a category of people, you're taking away a category of representative that would have been much more highly forced to answer to a much more highly informed group of people, which would have been the state legislators. Okay, because people unavoidably get caught up in raising their families and this and that, and they turn indifferent. Not that they mean to, it just happens. It's just part of the way life goes. And the 17th Amendment took away a very wise check something that President Benson complimented in the book version of the Constitution, A Heavenly Banner. Okay, then number 3 here. Okay, so if you look at the entire Constitution, you will find no evidence that any one branch is to be the final arbiter of the meaning of the Constitution for all the other branches. Instead, what you find is Article 6, Clause 2 telling us that the Constitution, the laws, and the treaties are the supreme law of the land, and that the state representatives and federal government officers will be made to take an oath to the Constitution itself. So the implication there being that if you're ever given some kind of order or some kind of law to enforce, and that law is in conflict with the plain text of the Constitution, as John Marshall would say, when you're presented with 2 laws that are in conflict with each other, you have to recognize which law is the supreme law of the 2, which one is superior. So Thomas Jefferson argued in the Kentucky resolutions that it's obvious, since this power is not reserved to the federal government, and there are powers that are that this is then a state official's responsibility. It's any government officer's responsibility, their oath. And he even argued this when he corresponded with Abigail Adams. Okay, so the idea of nullification is what we call it. Did maybe John C. Calhoun abuse nullification? Let's go with probably, even though I think that his argument about the purposes and the fact that those tariffs did seem to be directly aimed at redistributing wealth from the South to the North, what have you, which is a violation of the purposes of the Constitution. I think he was right. Andrew Jackson, to me, is the more culpable of the 2. And ever since then, it's been treated as though that's what our Constitution is, even though the text of it still bears it out, that nullification on the part of any official who recognizes that they're being told to do something that conflicts with their Article 6, Clause 3 oath, should be able to nullify that law. Hopefully I said that right. I talk myself in circles sometimes. I'm not quite as good as the guy from, what do you call it? Princess Bride. Okay, moving on here. Abraham Lincoln and others, with all their logical ways of explaining why secession was illegal, the fact is the text doesn't bear it out. Okay, it just doesn't. As a matter of fact, the text looks like an exchange of considerations. The Articles of Confederation had a much stronger term. It used it 4 times, said perpetual union, which perpetual to me still implies effort, right? In other words, we're going to perpetually keep putting effort into keeping this union together. More perfect union strikes me as we're going to put better effort into it. We're no longer going to call it perpetual, okay? And nothing in there is coercively permanent, mandated to be permanent. That's just not there. And what would have needed to happen if you didn't want secession to happen is to amend the Constitution and make it clear and cut and dry. But no one did that. Instead, they simply invented all this logic and then just went in there and forced these southern states to remain in the Union. When basically all the southern states did was a reversal of the process for entering the Union. And this was an ongoing concept that was understood from the beginning of the Union. People were lazy, they didn't deal with it, they left it out of the text again and again, they never once amended it in. But right from the beginning, states were saying we reserve the right to reclaim the powers delegated by this Constitution. So that was implicit. That was, if anything, that was what was implied from the beginning. And I think that having that threat should have kept the federal government more humble. So to me, that is a diminishment of compound republicanism because now the states are permanently bullied into answering to the federal government. Okay, so diminishment. This is all I'm getting at. It's diminishment. The whole Civil War era was not well handled. I don't care how you say it. The radical Republicans, they were about as tactless as you can be. So, and they were trampling all over the agreement made that they had begged the South to enter into at the ratifying of the Constitution. So, as much as I agree with the cause of ending slavery, that's not even what the Civil War was over. It's just not. Let's not give it too much credit, guys. So, all right. Electoral college under attack. Yes, this is silly. No, these states, they want to end the electoral college. Sorry, to this day, the Constitution says we're a more perfect union. It does not say we're a nation. To begin treating us like a nation is dishonest, and that's what would happen if you did away with the electoral college. No, it's none ya. Stay off of it. The electoral college is what the people have consented to, and you cannot bypass it through any other means other than an amendment process. And even with the amendment process, you still cannot deprive the states of having their equal representation in the Senate. So this is part of our compound republicanism. They left an option for potentially the states to consent to having that go away, but I don't think they should. I think, I was comparing it recently to nowadays we've got the internet, and parents don't want their kids to have free access to this, that, and the other thing. So they put in all these passcodes to get on the computer, then afterwards all these blocks and what have you. This is what the Constitution is that makes it so ingenious. Any government would work for a moral and religious people, but what makes the Constitution so great is that even with a people that are starting to get immoral and non-religious, it makes it harder to suddenly get an authoritative government, okay? It puts up all sorts of roadblocks. It fortifies the weak spots, a lot like Captain Moroni would. The Constitution is incredibly inspired. Why would you want to do away with compound republicanism? Okay, now, number 6 forced and rushed ratification of amendments. We can get into the Revolution of 1913 another time, but let's just talk about the Reconstruction Amendments. Powell v. McCormick admitted that when someone is legitimately elected to be a representative or a senator, to add any other requirements before seating them other than age, years of citizenship, and residency is a violation of the Constitution. The existing members of each house are only allowed to judge the qualifications, not to invent new ones. Yet that's exactly what happened with the Reconstruction Amendments. So look, the amendment process is a sacred process that belongs to the states. That's a major part of our compound republicanism, and that was legitimately trampled during the Reconstruction era. And there's reason to be suspicious of what happened with the Revolution of 1913, but we can get into that another time. Look up the term Revolution of 1913. Okay? Then substituting the amendments with the amendment process with stare decisis. Again, the amendment process is a sacred process. There have been times when the Constitution, the plain text doesn't allow for this kind of thing or that kind of thing, but you take a case to court, right, and then the judges themselves come up with some explanation for what the Constitution is that doesn't comport with the text itself, but now that's permanently used as what we call stare decisis, or the living Constitution, and suddenly when you follow the actual Constitution, you're treated as though you're violating the Constitution. And no, this is, again, the amendment process is a sacred process that belongs to the states. It does not belong to the federal government. The federal government manages it, oversees it, but the ones who have the final say on it is the states. Okay, now I've got one more here that I thought of that I didn't put in my little list. And again, this is not a conclusive list, but this is the excessive use of things like the 14th Amendment, the ex parte Young doctrine, and the waiver of sovereign immunity. Or in other words, President Oaks would say this winner-take-all type of attitude whenever it comes to disputing what's constitutional, what isn't for a state to do. If you're constantly taking everything to the federal judicial branch, constantly suing state officials to bypass the 11th Amendment, constantly waiving sovereign immunity, somebody's going to be really mad when they lose, right? It's not good psychologically. You're basically starting to create, again, what was happening in the 1850s and 1860s, where you're getting a ridiculous divide in America. This is a bad idea. Most things should be left to the legislative and negotiating process at the state level. And this is what President Oaks argues for again and again. And he says that whenever such things are redistributed by way of a Supreme Court decision, we should be alarmed, and we should seek to moderate, seek to advocate for correcting the situation with the manner of peacemakers, right? But anyhow, constantly resorting to the Supreme Court to resolve all sorts of state level issues is undoubtedly, since again, the states are supposed to have their own Republican form of government, then the federal government is supposed to have its federal level. The federal government is supposed to have its powers. This is the second principle, by the way, in defending our divinely inspired Constitution. And then the states are supposed to have everything else, or the people. This is the Ninth Amendment principle too. It's not even necessarily all supposed to belong to the states. So I think this is where a lot of those cases come from, is the states probably not thinking about Ninth Amendment type principles. But it's besides the point. You want to make matters worse, put it in the hands of the judicial branch for them to create stare decisis around the issue, and now there's no more room for negotiating, legislating around it, anything like that. At that point, you've etched something in stone, whether or not it's a good decision, right? And you've ticked a bunch of people off in the process. And so study the talk given at University of Virginia by Dallin H. Oaks, or his talk, Fundamentals of Our Constitutions, which was given in 2010, if I'm not mistaken, at the Tabernacle for Utah Constitution Day. And you will find further commentary on this. Of course, there's the brief commentary he gives in defending our divinely inspired Constitution. We do not find inspiration in every Supreme Court decision interpreting the Constitution. That's it. So again, compound republicanism, it's Federalist 40-something, 50-something by James Madison. That's the term he coined, and it is what the Constitution does set up if you pay attention to it. And so I just tried to hit some stuff that diminishes away at it. Hopefully this is useful for somebody. Thanks for listening, guys. See ya.